how long this will last. We don't know what challenges we're going to face along the way. And we don't know what our work and our lives are going to look like on the other side. We are wandering in the wilderness together right now. Today's session features 3 exceptional exercising leadership beautifully in recent weeks. I'm so grateful to Elissa Maier from Prizmah, Jim Rosenberg from JUF, and Kate Belza O'Bannon from Repair the World for stepping up while they are dealing with so much. I'm going to share my slides again just for a moment to give you the shape and flow of today's session so that you'll know what to expect.
Wow.
So, here are our goals for this hour. We hope that each of you will gain insight into, oh, that says 3, and it should say the, I apologize, that you'll gain insight into the ways that organizations are responding. We hope that you'll develop approaches to decision-making that you can bring back to your organizations and your work. And we hope that each of us will feel connected and supporting as a result of being on this call. Our plan for this time is we'll begin with an interview with our panelists. I'll be asking the 3 of them some questions. We'll then go into breakout rooms and you'll have a chance to have a more thorough Q&A with one of our 3 speakers. And then please do stay on the call. We're gonna come together at the end for about 10 minutes. We're gonna ask you to complete a 30-second evaluation, which is incredibly helpful for JPro, so please do plan on doing that. And we're going to invite you to share out a little bit over the chat, and our speakers will share closing reflections. So that's our flow for this hour. And I want to just give one last reminder. I know that some folks have joined us since we got started. Please, if at all possible, turn on your video. It doesn't matter what you look like right now. It doesn't matter if you did your hair. It doesn't matter if children or pets pop up on the screen. It's all good. It'd be great to see your face if you can make that happen. Please change your Zoom name so that it begins with the breakout group number that you are choosing. If you don't know how to change your Zoom number, it's not hard to do. Just hover over the Zoom box that has your video in it, right click, and then choose rename and add the group number that you want to select. If you're having the technology, just throw the number in our team will make it happen. If you're not able to pick a group, if you're on the phone, we will randomly assign you to a group. Okay, here we go. So I'm delighted to welcome our speakers. Before we dive into the panel discussion, some of you who were on before the hour have heard this technology spiel already, but I want to give it to everyone so that those who are newer to Zoom can familiarize yourselves again. If you hover your cursor at the top right of your screen, you'll see that there are different choices of how to be viewing everyone. So there's a speaker view that you can choose where you will be seeing large, the person who's speaking, and everyone else smaller. So that might be nice during the panel discussion. Or you can go to gallery view where you'll see everyone's boxes across the street, the screen, and you can actually navigate through the various screens of speakers. A reminder to please keep yourself muted so that we can hear our speakers. And if you do have technology issues, we'll be doing our best. You can put them in the chat, and we'll be doing our best to respond to those. So with that, Elissa, Kate, Jim, thank you so much for joining us. We've been inspired by your organization's responses. Each of your organizations is structured in a very different way. You're working with different kinds of networks, and I think it's going to be really powerful for us to hear how you're working, how you're navigating. To begin, it would be great if each of you would introduce yourselves, tell us about your organization, tell us about your role within the organization, tell us where you live so that we know where you're sitting, And if you feel comfortable, it would be great to just hear a personal word about how you're holding up, what's going on within the four walls. And for this question, let's begin with Elissa, and then go to Jim, and then Kate will have you wrap it up.
Great, thanks, Lana. Hi, everyone. I'm Elissa Maier. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Prizmah, Center for Jewish Day Schools. We work with all of the Jewish day schools across the country. I live in Englewood, New Jersey, and in normal times, I commute into the city on a regular basis, and now enjoying time in Englewood, New Jersey. And in terms of how I'm holding up, so you know, every day is a new adventure, is what I have to say. I have now my entire family home, which is great. My two daughters are here. We have each staked out a section of the house that is serving as our office space. Periodically, we run into each other at lunch, and I'm trying to appreciate the positive in the moment. You know, my commute is certainly better. The time it takes to get up the stairs is certainly less than New York City traffic. And family dinners are a great thing to have the whole family sitting around the dinner table. There's a moment. So trying to find moments of appreciation in what's really stressful and anxiety-producing times.
Thank you, Elissa. Jim?
Everybody, so I'm Jim Rosenberg. I'm the Chief of Staff of the Jewish Federation in Chicago. We call it JUF, Jewish United Fund. I've been in this role for 8 years. I've been with the organization for 20 years. You're all familiar with federations. Chicago's a big one. We've got over 350 staff members in a bunch of different departments that are overseeing a bunch of different areas in the community and in our building, a lot of programming taking place. And I'm calling in from Evanston, where I grew up and where I live. And right now in our house, my wife, who also works, and my 3 daughters are home. My oldest just came back from Montreal, where she finished her first year and is still finishing at McGill. I have a senior in high school and an 8th grader. And so we're, like Elissa said, navigating space, navigating time together. And I just want to just acknowledge everyone on the call for all that you've been doing this past several weeks, and particularly this week. Many of you went remote this week. It is incredibly challenging. It's never happened before, really. And a special shout out to the Chicago folks on the call, but really everybody for the work that you're doing. And look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for the dog therapy earlier. It was always good to see a sweet puppy in stressful times. Kate.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today, and Alana and Jade Protein, thanks for just creating this space for everyone to convene. I'm Kate O'Bannon. I am Repair the World's Senior Director of Strategy, and at Repair, we mobilize Jews and their neighbors to take action to pursue a just world, and we mobilize each year tens of thousands of young Jewish adults and their peers to be volunteering and serving their communities to tackle pressing needs. And so we are thinking a lot right now about how we might continue to be working and living under these new realities. Repair operates in 9 cities across the country, but I happen to live in Richmond, Virginia, and have been actually working remotely for the organization for the last 3 years. So happy to share some working from home tips for anyone that might need them. But I also have my husband working from home now. So we're definitely feeling the little bit of navigation of space, even though I don't yet have kids. So like Jim and Elissa, don't have that happening at home. And I would say in terms of how I'm feeling, the world feels so uncertain to me. And at the same time, the Jewish idea of loving your neighbor has also never felt more pertinent. So just thinking about both of those things together. And I know that I'm someone personally, and I think a few of us sort of at Repair, we've been talking this on our team, are folks that are finding energy towards starting to move and starting to do some things amidst this crisis. So trying to challenge those feelings of uncertainty into somewhat positive productivity.
Thank you all so much. I'll share a personal note from my house, which is that we hit a record yesterday of watching Frozen 3 times in a row on repeat. So we're going for 4 today. The curriculum, the homeschool curriculum is memorizing the whole movie. So I think for this next question, I actually would like to ask you each to respond in the same order. We'll switch up the order going forward, but Elissa, I think it makes sense to begin with you here. Can you tell us a little bit about just when did you first know, when did your organization first know that this wasn't business as usual? Tell us about that moment and sort of when that became clear. And then what were the very first steps that your organization took? Recognition kind of came into focus.
Sure, great. So for us, it was probably pretty early. We have a bi-weekly staff meeting on Tuesdays, and 2 weeks ago on Tuesday, we learned that SAR Day School in Riverdale, New York, was going to be closing because some students had been exposed in Westchester to someone who had tested positive. It was the second person in the New York area to test positive. And this actually became a little bit too close for comfort very, very quickly. For Prizmah itself, we have 5 of our staff people are either parents of an SAR student, one has a spouse, one has a sibling. So we have 5 people who were directly impacted, and we had to make some quick decisions before we really even knew what was going on. Now, like Repair, we have the good fortune at Prizmah of being already a remote organization, so our transition to remote was a little easier. But the first decision that I made, and it was a really, really tough one, was for the 5 families impacted directly with SAR. We asked them, they're all in our New York office, we asked them to work remotely until we knew what was going on. Some of them were in the office that day, and I actually asked them to head home, and it was very uncomfortable. We did a lot of talking about it with our team in New York, but people were wondering what was going on, but it hit us rapidly and quickly. And then we had sort of the 2 pieces going on. How do we navigate internally at Prizmah, and what do we need to do quickly to support the field and provide webinars and training about what online learning and all of those pieces. So from those first steps, we then, immediately offered for our other New York team, for those who felt uncomfortable coming into the New York office. We had someone who recently had a baby. We offered the option of working remotely. And then a week later, last Thursday, we went fully remote, in essence, shutting the office, although we have a couple of people who either walk or drive in that can periodically check on things there. But it was pretty rapid transition for us.
Thank you, Elissa. Jim?
Okay, so I look back on my calendar, and this thing really, like for us, really crept up on us. And I think what's interesting, one of my takeaways is that this thing was a constant moving target. If you look back 3 weeks ago, it was creeping up on us. We understood it, but the decisions we were making, if we were to make those today, it would be a no-brainer. But back 3 weeks ago, it was like a big deal. So we started talking about it with our senior staff. I look back on February 27th, and heat up the following week, and then we really got into it. One of our first decisions that we made, again, now it doesn't seem like how would we not make that decision, but we made the really difficult decision to cancel the second of our major community programs, which is a second 8th grade trip. We do a Tanya Surreal, which is a trip for 180 8th graders community. The first trip, the second one was going to be 100 kids. It's actually was supposed to leave this coming Sunday. And I remember the conversations we had about whether or not maybe we can figure it out, what's going on. And then when flights started canceling through in Europe through connections, it was a no-brainer. And of course, now we can't imagine the idea of having 8th graders, let alone anyone, stuck in Israel quarantine and so forth. So that kind of brought it to life. But one of the things that we did, we're not remote, and we really don't have a emergency remote working plan. One of the lessons I think from all this is you start thinking about all these procedures and policies that you really need to have in place. So our main priority was really figuring out what are the critical work that folks needed to do. And we started auditing all the departments. And this is only about 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, auditing all the departments and asking them to identify what is the critical work that they needed to get done, what resources did they need to make that happen, and really listing on spreadsheets and sending it in from all the departments to a common source what are the things that need to get done, whether it's who else needed a laptop that didn't have a laptop, what programs need to continue, what programs need to cancel, that kind of brought together our remote working plan that we needed to implement. The other thing that was critical for us during that process was communication, communication, communication. You know, you go from location, location, location to real estate, to relationships, relationships, relationships when it comes to fundraising and development work. But this crisis is all about, and has continued to be about, communication, 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 to continue to bring our staff along in terms of what was going on, whether it was a broad communication, whether it was slowly tipping people off or leaking information, not leaking in a kind of a deceiving way, but just kind of information that they would understand, that they could make that leap forward, and then really making sure that our senior staff and department heads were communicating downstream so everybody understood what was going on. So that was for us, that we had a pivot really to understand how we could have our workforce get their jobs done, working from home, and making decisions along the way in terms of what are the programs that we can continue on, which ones couldn't we do. Of course, we've canceled a ton like everyone, and really making sure our staff feels comfortable working in kind of this remote setting.
Thank you. Kate?
Thanks, Jim. Definitely resonate with the communication piece. So we first realized we had to start paying attention the last week of February. One of our senior staff members had come back from vacation in Italy and took precautionary self-quarantine. And so her and her family were already in self-quarantine. And we realized at the point that then there was the first cases in New York that like this was something that really needed to be taken seriously. And I'll say like the week of March 6th is when we really decided sort of that it wasn't going to be business as usual for us. The first steps we took were sort of thinking through with the senior team about what was our plan for making sure our staff, our fellows in the communities were operating in ways that were safe. That partially meant that we started like with in impacted cities, only essential programming for that week was sort of allowed. And so, for example, our fellows that were going to partners to deliver food to people who need emergency food services, for that week that they continued, and unfortunately most of that has also now stopped. But we tried to do it as long as we could until the point that we felt that it wasn't safe anymore. We also set up a bunch of internal communication protocols, both sort of like how amidst the different types of teams we would be communicating. This week we didn't have Slack on our team, but implemented Slack, and it's been a helpful tool for all working from different places. And the last thing we did the week of March 6th is we partnered with our partners at Amplifier, and we put out a resource on caring for the sick, inspired by our Jewish values, that I'm happy to share if folks haven't seen it. So we were at that point even still trying to both continue living sort of what we think is important for us to be doing at the time, while also making sure that we're keeping people safe.
Thank you, Kate. There's so much to digest in what you've all shared already. I want to ask if each of you would sort of briefly share anything else that you're doing right now, like in the present moment, to respond that we haven't had a chance to hear about yet. And Kate, why don't we begin with you this time, and then we'll go to Elissa and then Jim.
Sure. Yes, and I just put the resource for those that are interested into the chat. So a couple of things that I would name. First is that across the country, we have asked all of our team to be in touch with our 70 core service partner organizations to really listen and understand their needs. And we're hearing kind of like three different things from them. Some of them are saying that many of them are saying that they're just in triage mode, trying to figure out how they can continue serving people and serving vulnerable populations during this time, and kind of like give them a week before we come back to them. The second group is really saying to us, we're trying to start doing virtual volunteering, and like, can we figure out ways to be partnering on that? And the third one is really saying sort of, we really need financial support at this time. And so we're trying to shift ourselves to be thinking how we might meet those types of needs by adapting our own program strategies. So like, for example, in Atlanta, one of our partners is starting online tutoring. And so we've started to do some online tutoring there. We're working through it. Some of it's working and some of it's tough. In Pittsburgh, we're working with our Young Families program to be sending letters and art to residents living in Jewish senior living homes, which seems like a nice way to connect kids working, being in their homes, and seniors that might be living and not be able to have any type of visitors. And then in Harlem and Brooklyn, we're doing a lot of fundraising efforts for our partners to try and get people to, if they're able to give even $1 or $5 or whatever they're able to be able to meet the needs, and especially with like emergency food access. The second thing I think that we're doing is we're trying to coordinate with a bunch of our national Jewish engagement types of partners to really be thinking about like how we might use this as an opportunity to collaborate in ways we haven't before. So one of those is out and in other ways as well, and some of that's sort of like still in work in progress, but we are trying to think through that. And then the third thing that we're really doing in our team in terms of programming internally is this week we sort of made this like pivot to really focus on how we might mobilize the Jewish community to care for those most vulnerable in this crisis, even from their homes. And so we've rolled out 6 cross-organizational working groups across the team, and first brought the team together to do some brainstorming about what those might be, sort of took their ideas, sourced them, put project managers together, et cetera, and have groups around things like virtual volunteering and showing up for our service partners, providing mutual aid and support, continuing virtual community building, et cetera. So we are definitely starting to look for partners for all of those types of things we're doing. So I'll name that as something that's just in our mind, and it's also really a work in progress. So it's like we'll see what happens, and trying to just continue to adapt and pivot and be nimble and do a lot of listening.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's mind-boggling to think about the 70 partners that Repair the World has and all of the needs that they're meeting, and just sort of thinking about how you're staying connected to that. Really powerful. I think, Elissa, did we say we were going to you next? Yeah, okay. Elissa.
Right. Yep, got it. We like to think about Prizmah as being the network to connect day schools across the country, and that's actually what we're seeing is of greatest value right now. So as I said, SAR was the first school to close down, and they launched right into remote learning. And so we were able to use them as an opportunity from what they learned in their first week, how they could share that with others, as 1 week later, almost all schools were engaged in remote learning. And so we facilitated a webinar with SAR where they shared what worked, what didn't work, the technology needs. We immediately at Prizmah started figuring out how we could get remote learning access to schools, Zoom rooms, capturing, working to get reduced rates. Zoom immediately raised the limit for schools from a capacity of, for a free room of 40 up to 100. So working on providing resources such as that. Our Reshet page, which is in essence like a listserv, a conversation, has been incredibly active with people sharing what are they communicating, how are they communicating. Just as Jim spoke about one of their first decisions was around Israel chips. That was a big conversation. Schools that were determining, do we need to cancel? Again, it feels so crazy now because these decisions are no-brainers, but at the time, it felt like a very huge, big decision. So how schools were navigating this. We immediately put up a resource page, and we've had incredible the number of hits to the page of people looking at that for resources, and we continue to update it. And one of the resources that we share is, again, we post all of these internal communications that schools are using. No need to recreate, and people are so stretched and pressed if they can share what others are doing and how others are learning. And it's interesting because we also had to go outside of what is typically our work. We don't look in the work that we're doing with Prizmah typically being very focused on curriculum, but that was the immediate need. And we didn't present ourselves as the subject matter experts in this area. What we did is we connected people to others who have expertise in that. We're now at this inflection point where online learning is up, for good and for bad. It's not fully successful. You can't, teachers who haven't done this before, it's not like taking a lesson and, just translating it to online learning. So there will be continual learning around that. But we're now starting to think about what are the longer term implications, which we know are going to be so significant for schools. Financial implications that will impact enrollment, for smaller schools that are more challenged with resources. This could really hurt them substantially and potentially create, concern about being able to reopen or the need for merger. So we're exploring all of those issues right now and trying to connect to other organizations to help us with that. So for instance, JFNA is working on government funding, and we're connecting with JFNA. We are working with Hebrew Free Loans. So again, it's about connecting to the broader community. And I think that's actually one of the really powerful messages of this, is that we don't have to work in isolation. There's opportunity for collaboration across the community. I mean, simple little things. We had a webinar we were doing the other day. Within an hour of launching the registration for the webinar, we had we sold out. We had our largest room had a capacity of 100, and we had 150 people, and we had a wait list and all of that. And Zoom wasn't able to turn around quick enough to get us a room, and we were in a bind. And JFNA said, take our room, So we're looking at, where are the opportunities and how can we collaborate? And I think that's actually a really powerful message for all of our organizations right now.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Elissa. Jim?
So we have a lot of thinking that we were doing both internally and externally. So again, we're running a big business. We're several hundred employees, but our business is the community. And really that's, I think, the biggest thing for all of us as this JPro lens for all of us. We're not making widgets. Our business is people. And that's why this whole thing, I think, for everyone is so hard in terms of decision-making and in terms of thinking about our work. Our work is relationships and people. Before I get to kind of some of the things we're doing now, the way at least I thought of capturing all the different needs and all the different ideas that were out there is I kind of created these 4 buckets for myself that I kind of filled in as we're going along over these 2-week period. The first one is just the work that we need to get done, whether it's the programs we're doing, the day-to-day jobs and so forth. The second is our employees as kind of an ecosystem. Like, how are we, as going to the internal thing, how are we addressing their needs and how we need to respond? Because I think the response to this is not, again, just the clients out there, but really the employees and kind of how we're working with them. The third is our volunteers. We're a volunteer-driven organization, and what are their needs and how do we can maintain their engagement? And the fourth is really the community and what their needs are and assessing that. So there's a couple of things that I've been particularly impressed with in terms of how my colleagues are doing the work and moving forward. Besides advancing, one of the biggest and most important things we did is we advanced some dollars to our affiliate agencies, and we're of course working on plans for additional resources. But kind of putting money aside, there's a couple of things that I think are pretty neat. One is really a simple thing, and that is this concept of the one-on-one conversations. We've had a number of us, led by our exec and a lot of our development people, a lot of one-on-one conversations with donors, with rabbis, with community leaders, with heads of organizations and agencies, just to check in, see how they're doing, continue those relationships. We haven't done, maybe some other communities have done kind of larger webinars and other kind of bringing everyone together virtually. We've kind of taken a different route. And the one thing about Chicago that we like to talk about is that it's a big, big city. There's 300,000 Jews here, although we're about to do our population study the next couple months, so we'll push it back a little bit. But it really does feel like a small Jewish community because of those relationships and because of those one-on-one conversations. So that's something that's a specific tactic that we're taking. The other thing is a couple of things. One, we created a task force of our agencies and some local foundations to really examine and take a look at what are the needs. And we're creating a survey that we're pushing out at the end of this week, beginning next week, to organizations across Chicago with a number of questions for them to fill out in terms of what are the issues that they're dealing with specifically. We all know we could say payroll and cancellation of programs and all these other issues, but really digging down and getting into the weeds of what their specific needs are, what resources do they need. And right away, our local foundations reached out to us, and we all saw, I think, on E-Jewish Philanthropy, they saw that big letter that went out from the foundation saying we want to partner with all of you, and that's playing itself out here in Chicago, really creating a nice working relationship to kind of get some data and then go from there and work together on what the impact is and what the needs are. It's easy to say let's create a lot of initiatives around development, but if you don't know what the impact, what impact you're trying to affect, or what the needs are, it doesn't really work. You need both. And I would say the third thing is really pushing out, kind of like Elissa talked about, pushing out to the community resources. There's so much out there, it's unbelievable, and you get dizzy trying to follow all the different links and all the different newsletters that are coming out in terms of the interesting things, from what BBYO is doing with their Netflix kind of approach to President Rivlin and his really passionate and wonderful. So our marketing communications department has been pushing out on a regular basis to the community all of these resources, links to that, to constantly keep people engaged in what's going on, as well as specific opportunities for folks to get involved, to volunteer. We have a volunteer network and we have an intake form where people can sign up saying they want to help out doing this. Just pushing stuff out there, I think, is that so that people who are feeling maybe isolated or feeling how can they plug in, get connected. And the last thing I'll say is really the response is really going back to the staff and making sure that our staff members, again, whether it's someone who's been there years or someone who just started 3 months ago, are feeling connected within their own department and within their larger department. We have a monthly all-staff meeting, and the folks on the phone from Chicago, I'll be sending an email out later this morning to all our staff there. We're going to do it. We're going to continue on. We're going to have our virtual all-staff meeting. We have to kind of create some normalcy. We have to update folks. But the response, I think, of every organization has to be, what about your people and how are your people feeling and how they're doing? Thank
you. We are going to transition in a moment into breakout groups. I'm going to ask our speakers, when you begin in your breakout group, if you could please start by talking about how is your organization structuring decision-making? And by that, I don't mean what decisions are you making? I mean, what are your approaches to decision-making? What's the rubric or model or process, sort of what are some of the practices you're developing? And I think really in light of what all three of you have highlighted, which is that hindsight is 20/20. Like if we could rewind 3 weeks, we would know exactly what to do, but the decisions we've made along the way about what to cancel, whether to, all of it was impossible to see clearly. So now here we are today, things are still very foggy. How are you making decisions? So if you could begin by speaking to that. Before we go into breakout rooms, I just want to acknowledge for everybody that our speakers are not going to be in a position to acknowledge all of the specifics of the kinds of decisions their organizations are making. I think they'll be in a better position to talk about the sort of the how and the process of decision making. And in particular, I want to acknowledge that many of us have concerns about the financial security of our organizations. Many Jewish professionals are worried about the security of their employment. And we are just not in a position yet to be able to address the specifics of those kinds of questions. But I do want to say that we at JPro are striving to support our community of colleagues, and we are exploring whether and how we might be helpful with processing those kinds of existential concerns. And that's something that we'd appreciate hearing from you in the evaluation. So in a moment, you'll be whisked into your breakout groups. You'll be there for 15 minutes and then you'll be whisked back, and we'll have about 10 minutes to wrap up all together. Elissa, Jim, Kate, thank you again for sharing with all of us. We'll see you soon.
See and hear you.
Amazing. All right. I'm going to turn it over to you, Jim, and would love for you to open by talking about sort of the hows and process of decision making. And then we're going to open it up for folks to throw questions in the chat. Depending on our group size, we may be able to hear questions.
Okay. Great. It's funny, I was just looking at an email just now about decision making. So I'm like, oh, perfect. I'm just going to read it now. So I would say, like all of you, we're just figuring out as we're going along. And we're trying to maintain a process that we've always had with decision making, although ironically, and those on Chicago know that we have a group that's focused on decision making that started a couple months ago. We have about these 6 or 7 what we call strategic cultural groups. And one of them is decision making, how we can do a better job either slowing down or speeding up our decision making process. So that's kind of funny. So I would say that the 2 things that stick out, or 3 things. One, and this is kind of from this email I just saw, one, it's kind of incremental. Like, it's impossible to make a decision now for something that's going to be downstream even 3 weeks from now. We canceled all our events through the end of, I'm looking for people at April, I think. And we're a very event-driven federation, and we're in the very heavy event season now. So it's a huge change of pace, change of the way we're doing our work. So those are the biggest decisions around that, but it's kind of incremental. So as I said earlier, canceling our 8th grade trip, our Tom trip, 2.5 weeks ago seemed like the biggest decision in the world, and now it's like that would have been easy today. So it kind of moves along. So I would go back to the things I said earlier: communication. We are trying to meet regularly throughout the organization, whether it's kind of a senior team or departments or smaller groups, are meeting on a regular basis, keeping people up to speed on kind of what's going on, because you can't make a decision without information. And that's part of the reasons why we're doing this intake of data from our community, from our partners, from organizations. There's another document that's going around, a spreadsheet beyond that task force item I mentioned, which is just any time an idea comes into our organization or a community organization has a specific need, we're kind of putting it down on a list, whether it's camps having this issue or this organization is having this issue. We're putting it on a list to kind of get some information so we can make that decision. The other thing is trying to figure out a balance between getting rid of the bureaucracy around decision making, especially in today's time. You know, I'm just looking at some of the faces, you know, I want Paula, I want Leah, I want various people who are on this call from Chicago that I see right now, Lily, to be able to make decisions that are not going to break, we're not going to break anything. Everything's broken right now. And so it's like, how do we get to a point where we can empower our staff to be able to run with an idea, or be able to say, you know, that's a great idea, we're kind of doing that already, and not feel like they're forced to kind of wait, I need to get someone else, my supervisor or my supervisor or my executive, to say that's okay. And so clearly it's not saying just decide on your own, but we want to create a balance around a process so that people can be nimble, there's trust, so that our folks feel confident that they can make the decisions. And that's kind of a cultural thing that we're talking about anyways, and so it's playing itself out in real time here. So I don't have a magic answer about structuring decision making other than communicating what the issues are and then talking about it in kind of a constructive way.
Thank you so much, Jim. I'm glad to see conversation happening in the chat, and I think it's great. We can do this in 2 streams, so please all feel free to be responding to the questions in the chat. Thanks, Alexis, for your question. Jim, can you talk about whether JUF is doing anything virtual for the donors or participants in the canceled events, and maybe others on the others?
Yeah, and I might defer to some others on the call. We're not really yet there in terms of virtual events, just because we're, we just went through a process of kind of knocking them off and canceling them all on, but there may be some downstream. I think there's some downstream things that are taking place. I know, for example, my daughter is a participant. Actually, she's a JC counselor for Diller. She's the one who's a senior in high school, and I know they had a call last night. I assume it was virtual. I don't know what they did, but it was a check-in, and they were participants. So that's like one of our small cohorts that is forced to. And that was also another early decision, by the way, that the Israelis wouldn't be coming over spring break, which was like crushing. So they had a call last night where they were talking and touching base and seeing how everyone's doing. And I feel like right now, a lot of the virtual work and virtual connection is just kind of making sure folks are not feeling isolated and checking in, seeing how they're doing. I don't know if anyone from Chicago wants to jump in terms of, and again, I'm happy to kind of share the screen. I think Paula just unmuted herself in terms of something's going on.
Yeah, so I'm in the Community Outreach and Engagement Department of JUF Federation, and our Young Families department is definitely gearing up to replace what they were planning on doing for the holidays, and doing that all remotely. And as Jim mentioned, our teen initiatives are also planning on doing something similar. Our Young Leadership Department has reached out to Community Outreach and Engagement so we can collaborate on some joint programs or offer them some opportunities for their leadership, whether they're young families, or they may be able to piggyback on some of the work that we're doing. So it's nice to see some collaboration between departments that we always do, but now it's even more necessary.
And there was a young family, supposed to be a young family camp weekend last weekend, and they did a Shabbat Facebook Live gathering. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Great. There are so many great questions in the chat. We have 5 more minutes, so we may not get to all of them, and please do respond to one another in the chat as well. Are you conducting or planning to conduct an emergency campaign? How are you thinking about that? I think.
So right. So we're Chicago is known for really jumping on the concept of thinking about emergency campaigns. During some of the difficult times in the early 2000s with Intifada and kind of the terror campaigns and so forth, we did some major second line campaigns. A guiding principle for us is our annual campaign. We're really like, the annual campaign is an important concept, and so we like to think of our annual campaign as really kind of addressing what's going on and being nimble. And so while some communities are doing some things, which is great, and what we actually did is we have created, when things like natural disasters happen and so forth, we create kind of what we call an open mailbox or a relief fund to create that. We have created a COVID-19 relief fund, but we're not pushing it out there. It's really more for folks who are interested in kind of doing something right now. I want to give some money and help out because I want some masks to be bought, or whatever the case may be. But we're really kind of trying to hold the line a little bit. In fact, one of the conversations that we're having with our major donors is to say, we are waiting to understand really what's going on out there. And during the recession in 2008 and 2009, we created what was known as J-Help, which was essentially asking our top donors to double down on their gifts. And we raised over a 4-year period, $25 million that was on top of our annual campaign dollars that were raised. And that really, if you look at a famous graph that we have, it really shows how J-Help really evened out and made our campaign whole over those 3 or 4 years. So our approach is to kind of slow down, take it easy. We created this other fund just in case folks wanted to take a look at it and to give something, but we're not pushing it out there. And we take our time. We're often not the first out. We take our time to kind of get a sense of really what's going on. And after that, then we kind of are ready to kind of go into action.
Great, thank you. With apologies to those whose questions we weren't able to address here, and know that we are tracking them, and we'll hope to respond in other ways. Is there particular planning that you're part of, Jim, around senior populations, vulnerable populations? Can you give us some insight into how that's being thought about on a citywide level?
Well, so we have one of our major agencies, CJE Senior Life, is really kind of our folks that focus on that. And we have been obviously in touch with them from day one. I mean, there's so many issues around seniors and care for them, vulnerable populations. Even seeing emails from a group that we're not affiliated with from a standpoint of being a recipient of ours from grant dollars, seeing notes that, only emergency and medical professionals can go in. I mean, I feel like that's the #1 thing with the isolation and making sure that folks can get that. And I think about, my in-laws in Toronto are in a kind of a more senior home, and they, my wife can't, and my sister-in-law who's in Toronto, they can't visit them, kind of thing. So those kind of things in terms of reaching seniors and providing what they need, that's really the power of our community, because we are relying and working in partnership with our affiliate CJE Senior Life to really determine that and help us kind of manage that, and working with whether it's legislation or working with our state, trying to figure out what are ways that we can do to get more funds that way, provide more services. And really one of the ideas that have come out throughout all this is trying to identify, or volunteers are saying, we want to do some call-ins, we want to check in. And that's the point I'll make, is that staff generally, if they can't do their job, we're trying to think, how can we be nimble with them, and can they do other things that they're not normally doing? And maybe it's picking up the phone and calling 10 people to reach out and see how they're doing. So those are the things. I think basic needs, but also kind of that mental health is really critical.
What a beautiful note to leave us on before we go to the main session. And if you all hang on, Zoom will whisk you there, or you can click on the box to return. But just the notion of redeploying folks and just reaching out by phone to people who might be isolated, like, what a great thing to do with folks whose work has been disruptive.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. So I really see this as more of an informal time. I'm very, very happy to answer any questions. You can put them in chat. You can jump in with a question. I'm going to start, as Alana asked, and tell you about our decision-making processes at Prizmah. So as I shared, we sort of are looking at this from two perspectives: the field-facing perspective of what we need to do to serve the field, that's the nature of our work, and the internal processes of the decisions that we need to make as an organization and to support our staff. So we have one of our staff members who is leading our field-facing work, and a member of our leadership team who oversees our field-facing work, leading that aspect. And I'm leading the operational, internal, staff-minded decisions. And the three of us have formed a task force around this, and we meet daily. We have a half-an-hour check-in daily. Sometimes it's only 20 minutes or whatever it is, but to make sure that we're coordinated, to ensure that what we're hearing both in the field and internally, that we're addressing. We raise questions. We use each other as thought partners. Our leadership team meets weekly and acts on issues raised by the task force or by others. But that's our internal decision-making process. We also, our CEO and I are speaking very regularly with our lay leadership and involving them in our decision-making process. We have a board meeting coming up next week. As you can imagine, the agenda for our board meeting has transitioned substantially from what we thought it was going to be a month ago. to now really being focused on where we are now and the work that we need to do to support the field. So that's our decision-making process. I'm happy to answer questions or keep going with some other things. Are there any questions? Let me pause for a second.
Elissa, there's one that just popped into the chat from Jill.
Yep.
I don't know if you can see it, but maybe we can just repeat.
Yep, I see it. How have you coordinated communicating your employees who are not on the task force, lower level? Correct. Great question. So a couple of different things. Number one, we use Slack internally, and we use that to communicate regularly. And I want to tell you a couple of very interesting things in terms of our Slack conversations. So very early on, as we were having these conversations, we have a number of channels. By nodding your heads, how many of you are familiar with Slack? So I know. Okay, so some yes, some no. Slack has different channels that you can set up for different discussion groups. We have an all staff channel, which is our general discussion group, and then we have it divided by departments and programs and things like that. Our all staff channel was getting inundated with conversation around coronavirus. We actually created a coronavirus channel, which was just crazy to think about in the beginning and now is saturated, but it's how we kept people updated about the decisions that were being made around schools and all of that. So we use that to push out information on a very, very regular basis. By the way, actually, and I think, humor and supporting each other is a really, really important piece. So we have an all staff fun channel. It has actually been a lifesaver because, what people are sharing, funny things, messages, that's been a great relief. So we have that as well. We, as I said, we have a bi-weekly staff meeting. So we happen to have a staff meeting this week and we use that to update. We've also, because we know creating connection is so critically important at this time, we're sort of actually navigating this balance of people feeling isolated as everyone is home and not able to get out and about, and at the same time people feeling incredibly overloaded and saturated, especially for people who have children at home and they're navigating how this balance of making sure their kids are connected in terms of the online learning and all of those pieces. So carving out 15 minutes to connect with colleagues is actually not a priority right now. They want to focus on their work. So we have actually created a couple of opportunities for people to come together. We do a virtual lunch, half an hour, come, bring your lunch, sit down, and it's optional because I don't want to create more angst for people who actually need that half an hour back to be able to make lunch for their kids who are home. So, but we do have a half an hour lunch. Today, shortly after this webinar, we have a 15-minute pre-Shabbat gathering where we're just going to say Shabbat Shalom, share some stories of appreciation and mark the time in a meaningful and good way. So the connection is really important. So that's, and in terms of, I'm looking at the question specifically about our decision making. We share that either collectively through our all staff channel, we share it out through our leadership team members who are speaking with their teams, convening each of their teams, and we are in regular communication with our board. Does that answer the question?
For those of you who are, feel free to unmute yourselves and ask a question directly. I'm sitting here with my baby, so I'm sorry about the noise. And for those of you who are on the phone, to unmute, you just press *6 and you can jump in with a question that way.
So I see a question about, has there been discussion around the distinct role of board leaders and heads of school and communication out to your members? So in our Reshet groups, we have different groups. We have a head of school group, and we actually do have a group for school leaders, which hasn't been as active, and we're now pushing out information to that group. So one of the things that we're gathering information around now is what kinds of decisions are coming into schools so we can be responsive to some of those things. So we know, for instance, schools are getting questions about refunds for non-tuition related items, busing and school lunches and things like that. How are schools navigating those pieces? What are schools doing in terms of preparing budgets for next year when we don't know what enrollment numbers are going to be? So we use our Reshet groups to share out information, and we are using our regular field-facing communication to be able to bring resources to the field as much as possible. Other questions? So I'm gonna keep writing in the questions, and please interrupt me if you have other questions, but I want to share some of the other things that we're doing. One of the things that we recognize is that there's not a single answer, and every day brings different issues and challenges. So flexibility is really a very key piece. So as you know, as we've gone fully remote now, which, as I said, we were really set up to do. It wasn't difficult for us. This is how we communicate on a very regular basis through Zoom. However, it's different when your family is home with you. That actually changes a lot. So we've created flexible schedules. All we've asked people to do is communicate. So if there's a block of time in the middle of the day that you need to be offline to attend to whatever you need to attend to at home, just make sure that you message that out. And we've actually put into place a practice where we have backups for people. So if our head of marketing is going to be offline from 1 to 3 dealing with what she needs to do for her children, then we have a backup person who's navigating those questions and any kind of urgent questions that are coming in. So we're implementing a backup system to allow for flexibility, and we're asking people to just mark in their calendars so we know this is a point in time where I'm going to be offline. But we have staff starting to work at 7 in the morning so that they can take breaks in the middle of the day. We're not counting hours in any way, but in order for them to get their work done, we're looking at it from a place of flexibility. Are there other topics that I can address that would be of help?
Another person just wrote, or it might be the same person from before, wrote another question in the chat about your best advice around budgets and enrollments for the upcoming academic year, if you can address that.
It's an excellent question. I'm not sure we have advice yet. We're just starting to look at this. We are telling schools, who conservatively, they should be potentially budgeting on a 10 to 12% decline. I mean, it's not a universal answer for every single school. But we do know that that we are anticipating that, for many schools, there potentially could be a decline in enrollment. Schools are looking at, how might they restructure, what are budget saving staffing structures. So they may be looking at their staff plan and what that looks like. By the way, no different than other organizations. So those are some of the things, but we're going to be collecting and sharing out more and more information around this. I'm not sure I don't want to mislead and say we have the answers yet. We're looking to the field to gather information around this, about budgeting. Is there another question? Sorry, thought I saw a question coming. I'll keep sharing about some of the things that we're looking at. One of the challenges, we have about 3 minutes left. So one of the challenges that I know that we have been feeling internally, and I'm curious how others are feeling, is, we're very in the moment. Everything seems very all-consuming about what we're dealing with right now. And we're trying to figure out how we can continue to plan for the future and keep that work moving forward. I'm wondering if any of you have had some thoughts around, how you do the work of this crisis moment and at the same time think about planning for the future. Anyone have any things that you'd like to suggest to others? Things that you're doing?
I'll just share that one of the things that we've talked about on the JPro team is that right now we are a little bit in troubleshoot mode to try to quickly arrange things. And then in a few weeks, we hope that we'll sort of have time to settle into a new normal, if you will. And at which point we should probably be thinking about what this looks like a little bit more strategically for the long term.
Similar to what we've done, what we've tried to do right now is to prioritize what are the areas that, what do we need to let go of right now, and what are the things that continue to require attention. So, we're in budget planning season. We're going to continue to do the work that we need to do, although looking at the budget with a different lens right now. We've set a little bit of an artificial, I think many people have, sort of a line in terms of line in the sand in terms of timing, which is like pre-Pesach, post-Pesach. Pre-Pesach, it's sort of reactionary, continuing to be focusing on where we are at this moment, and post-Pesach needing to think more strategically about the future. What we are also trying to do is think about what are the priorities. Like if we have recruitment for programs next year that needs to happen, how can we continue to message that? I see we're going to be going in 1 minute. It's difficult times, and I wish everyone strength and use the support of colleagues to help you to navigate. I think that's really our most important message, is how we draw strength from each other.
Thank you, Elissa.
Thanks, everyone.
Welcome, everyone. So before we get started, there's many of you, and I think what would be great is if everyone could just share in the chat function. I think most people in this one, yep, it looks like everyone's on their computers or a phone. So if you could share in the chat function your name, the organization you're coming from, and just like either a question or hope that you're hoping to get out of the next 15 minutes. Again, share your name, the organization you're coming from, and a question or hope that you're hoping to get out of the next 15 minutes. This is so fun to see. Missy, we're not too far away from each other, I can see. Also in Richmond, Virginia. I suggest if you're done typing, feel free to read through what folks are writing in the chat function. Great. Thank you. I appreciate it. So we're definitely not going to be able to get to all of this, and I'm happy to try to have conversations with folks afterwards as well. But I'm Kate. I work at Repair the World, and I guess to Ilana's first question around decision making, there's like two things that I think that we're thinking through. The first is more of the short term, and then the second is looking towards the long term. And I just want to acknowledge it's really tough to do both of those at the same time, and also in some ways feels necessary. So we're trying to do the best that we can in both of those pieces. But for a couple of guiding principles, I would say that we're trying to use for ourselves. The first is that even amidst these evolving circumstances, we're trying to continue to build programs, initiatives that will inspire and mobilize Jews and their neighbors to take action. That's our mission, and we are still trying to do that, even though it looks very, very different. But that's one thing I think that as we're getting lots of different requests and different people reaching out, that we're still trying to figure out how we're sticking to that piece. The second is really listening to both our community's needs and in our community, meaning both our internal team, the fellows that work with us every year, as well as the thousands of people that are in our sort of participant network and dozens of organizations that make up our partners. One of the things, in one specific example of that, we had been hearing from a bunch of our staff that they are just really having a lot of trouble adjusting to these new circumstances. And actually immediately after this call, we have instituted just a self-care afternoon and said, please take off before Shabbat starts and give yourself a few extra hours, and trying to think of ways to just listen and adapt and be open during this time. The third sort of guiding principle for us has been around a spirit of collaboration, generosity, and compassion. And this comes up a bunch with our team members, especially that have responsibilities with caregiving or are living with so many roommates that they're having trouble figuring out where they can get their work done. As our staff and our fellows are beginning to get sick, and really trying to have a culture of teamwork and of generosity, and understanding that time might look different right now for the team, and that makes a lot of sense. And then, as I sort of said before, just in terms of short-term planning, we're really taking it day by day and week by week, and trying to make sure that we're creating things that are able to have the flexibility to pivot or shift as needed, while also looking towards what's ahead, but also knowing it's really uncertain. And then for us, one thing that's just always important to repair is continuing to look at our work through an equity lens, and understanding that even as we're looking at this crisis, there are certain people that are in vulnerable situations that are really even more impacted than some of others of us. And so trying to think that we're both programming in that way and trying to meet those needs in that way. And then I would say the other piece that's a little more towards looking towards the longer term is our financial situation. So with the financial downturn and looking towards next year, our fiscal year at Repair starts August. So it goes August through July. And so we're working with our team, and then we'll be working with our board soon around some scenario planning of what that might look like. And so currently, for example, we're putting together 3 different budgets of proposals. The first is like a really worst case scenario of if we were only able to operate with just confirmed funds that were happening, that we have right now, and see no new things coming in for the next year. The second is more of like a conservative estimate, and the third is a more optimistic estimate. And we're going to use those right now, knowing that next week may be different, and we'll continue to have more information, but hopefully that we'll be able to use those 3 to be able to make some decisions in terms of the financial planning pieces. Great. So I am happy to take this wherever you would like to go for the next few minutes. Maybe I'll ask a couple of questions to the group, and if there's, and we'll see what happens. And if you could answer through chat, just because of the number of folks on the screen, I would appreciate it. So I'm going to give you 2 options, or 3 options. Going to give you 3 options. The first option is we can talk a bit more about virtual volunteering, keeping your volunteers engaged during this time. So that's like option 1. Option 2 is I can talk more about the structure of those working groups that we put together internally to do sort of cross-organizational collaborations. And then option 3 is we can talk more about the resource we created and like ways that we're using that in different types of programming. So option 1, virtual volunteering, keeping your volunteers engaged. Option 2 is, oh my gosh, now I'm forgetting what the options were. Option 2, I don't remember what I said option 2 was.
Cross-org collaboration and resources we created was the third.
Thank you so much. Awesome. And that was the third. So option 1, 2, or 3, what would you like to talk about? Great. Seeing lots of 1s, so we'll start with 1 and then get to 2 and 3. Okay, great. So virtual volunteering, I think there's 2 pieces we're really trying to think through here, and I can send out some resources if it's helpful through JPro potentially after the call. The first is understanding what platforms already exist out there that can be really useful to us during this time. So we're in conversation with organizations like Ketchup Fire and Points of Light. And I think we just started a conversation with Taproot. And these are sort of organization companies that already have platforms created that we're trying to say, can we have some type of collaboration to continue engaging our people? So that's one of the ways we're thinking about this, is like, let's look at what's existing and out there and funnel our folks into sort of spaces that we might not have been collaborating with before, but are thinking about. And then the second thing we're looking at is how do we continue to keep our core partners engaged with current partners. So that is the example. If you heard me earlier, I spoke for a second about how we have volunteers in Atlanta that usually go weekly to tutor the kids in an after-school mentoring program, and that we're turning into virtual volunteering. So allowing to continue to meet those needs that we sort of were already doing. And then I would say the third piece that we're thinking a lot about and are a little less involved in is how we're working with our lay leaders during this. So Repair has a national board of directors. We have a bunch of different area committees nationally, and then each of our communities has their own local advisory boards, and everyone's trying a few different things. A couple of them have put together sort of COVID-19 task forces. Others are just having more regular communications and calls. Nationally with our board, we've been trying to make sure we're having at least a weekly update that's going out to them, and have convened a couple of conversations. So and are going to trying to do some listening to figure out how do they want to be engaged, and how can we be thinking about different ways to engage them during this time. Any other specific questions right now about that? Okay, and then I can talk for a second about the number 2. I'm not exactly sure how much time we have left. But for the number 2 piece, sort of the cross-org collaboration, Repair has, I think we have like around 40 full-time staff, and we have 30-year-long fellows that are working with us. So we have 70 folks on our team that are now working from home, which is mid-size organization, I would say. We're not humongous, but we're not super teeny as well. And our fellows usually are spending at least 15 of their hours of the week, if not more, at their partners, and none of them are doing that anymore at this time. And so, and their other time is usually spent programming and doing one-on-one relationships, etc. We're continuing to have them do about half their time in kind of that existing work, but that other part of their time we're funneling towards these cross-organizational groups, with the idea that at this moment, with technology, we're hoping that we're able to use sort of brain power across the team to be thinking about things in a more efficient way, and an opportunity to be able to work across cities and work across different geographic locations. And what we're hoping will happen, and what we think might happen, is that both the places that are already starting to do some virtual programming. So for example, we had one last week and this week, a couple of our cities are doing virtual cocktails with a conscience, where they're having cocktails and speakers and doing organizations about different types of social change and social justice issues. And our question is, like, how might we be able to move those to be not just about this city by city piece, but really sort of like breaking those silos and thinking about it from a cross-organizational lens, and be able to move things across the board. In terms of the actual process, we did like a 90-minute design thinking with the entire team, and then through that process, tried to understand what some of the areas that people thought might be the most interesting to start working on. We assigned project managers to 6 different groups based on their interest and like the skills that we know that they have within the team. And then we had optional sign up across all of the teams to be able to do so. And I'll put in, like, if you're curious, these are sort of, we created how might we questions for all 6 of the working groups, and I'll go ahead and just put them in the chat screen if you're interested in seeing them. I think that we're almost done and out of time, but I'm more than happy to chat with anyone one-on-one or through Zoom or other pieces if you would like to. But I would just say that, like, this time is tough, and at the same time there's some opportunity to be able to continue to do good. And so I think that that's what we're kind of thinking about, is how might we continue to do good even amidst these evolving circumstances. See you back in the main room.
All right, as we all return, I want to all invite, request in fact, for everybody to do 2 things. To our speakers, while these things are happening, it would be great if you would think about one sort of brief reflection from your session to share back with us. That's how we'll close in a couple of minutes. Okay, so there's 2 things that we'd like for you to do. One is we are going to chat out momentarily a link to a very brief poll that's going to ask you for some feedback on the session, and also just your thoughts on what else JPRO can offer. Please, please, please take a moment right now to fill it out while we're on the call. So that'll be in the chat in a moment. And then, oh, there it is, a shortcut link. Grab that link, fill out the evaluation. The other thing that we'd like to ask you to do, it's a really great learning opportunity for all of us, is take a minute to write in the chat one thing that you are going to do as a result of something that you've heard or learned during this session. We're not able to put the link, I don't think, or we'll try to do that again, but you can copy and paste that link into your browser and it will work. Oh, and we're fixing it, but you can copy and paste the link. So again, please fill out that evaluation right now. And also please write into the chat one thing that you are going to do as a result of what you've heard or learned during this session. Let's get a sense of what the ripples of action are. And I know the thing that you're thinking about doing or sharing may inspire someone else. Take one day at a time. The value of supportive individual conversations. Yeah, staying connected. 90-minute design thinking sessions. Yes. Self-care right now, it's critical, even those of us who don't stop. Leaning into Slack. These are all great. Please keep them coming. Please fill out the evaluation. I'm going to share something that we're doing at JPro, and I want to acknowledge that we're a small staff team of 4, and in larger organizations this might not be possible. But we've given the staff team the opportunity to use our Zoom account for personal gatherings of family and friends. And so if your organization is in a position to do that, to support the folks who work in the organization to just keep their personal connection, Zoom can be a good platform for that. Yeah, there's so much coming in. I found out after the fact that I missed yesterday's Indigo Girls concert because I was unplugged. So too bad about that, but the quiet and the self-care is important. All right, thanks to everyone who is putting action steps that you're taking in the chat. You're inspiring all of us. Thank you for filling out the feedback form, and you can see it's coming through the feed over and over so that you don't miss it. I'm going to turn now to Jim, and then Elissa, and then Kate, to just share one reflection on your breakout group, and then from there we will close out.
Great, thank you. First of all, thanks everyone. And I don't know if you'll be circulating this, but I'm sure Kate and Elissa joined me in offering ourselves out to anyone. If anyone wants to kind of have further talk or conversation offline, and we can circulate how to get in touch. I would say that, as I think about this in our brief session, but the concept of flatten the curve, we all kind of know that, but I think this is an opportunity to really flatten the expertise concept. I know what I know, but I also know what I don't know, and I'm the first to admit that, and that's kind of really how I think about my job day to day, and especially in this environment. I know my tasks are to kind of assemble information and kind of get people moving and thinking, and kind of putting the right people in the right room, and then kind of going from there, and then kind of stepping back and letting good things happen. And so to the extent that there's so many people, everyone on this call has an expertise and an ability to kind of contribute and to think about how within their own organizations they can really take that opportunity. And I think we have a responsibility, those who are in leadership roles within organizations really need to listen and to allow the strategic thinking and good ideas that everyone has. No one's an expert when it comes to this. And so it's a great opportunity to really kind of share the wealth and really have other folks contribute in positive ways that maybe don't normally get that chance.
Thank you.
So I've been thinking a lot about, as Jim said, the importance of how we connect with our team. It's really, in addition to the work that we're doing, how we connect with our team and support each other is really important. And it feels particularly challenging right now as we navigate this need to be connected and at the same time need to disconnect and allow people flexibility and space for what they need to do, and how it's as Ilana said right in the beginning, we see kids popping up, dogs popping up, and it's great. And you know what, it's really nice to get to know our colleagues and their families in different ways. So how do we navigate this wanting to be of support in different ways? And we're learning and we're thinking, and I'll share, as I shared with my group, one thing that we're doing that I'm looking forward to today. We are convening just a 15-minute, and it's optional, opt-in, if you can't at that time, that's okay, but 15 minutes pre-Shabbat to just gather and have an appreciative moment and, acknowledge some, hopefully something that, in all of this challenge and all of this anxiety, reflect back on a positive experience, a positive moment, maybe, something that's impacted by the work that we're doing or how we're supporting each other. But literally just a quick 15 minutes, let's see each other, check in with each other, and opportunities like that we can shoulder each other up. That's what we're looking for.
Thanks, Elissa. I am thinking a lot about self-care, and I think I shared with my group that at Repair we instituted a self-care afternoon and starting immediately after this call through Shabbat. So I would love to connect with all of you, and we'll probably wait until Monday to do so. But I think that thinking about those of us that are in leadership positions and those of us just across organization are sort of advocating for what you need in terms of self-care during this time is super, super important. And then I wanted to close with, outside of Repair, I sit on the board of the Hillel, the University of Virginia. And last night we had our meeting, and the incredible executive director and rabbi there shared this with me, and I found it so resonant, and so thought it might be resonant for others as well. But he shared that, like, this week we're finishing the book of Exodus in terms of the Torah, and when you finish each book of Torah, it's customary to say chazak, chazak, and it's chasek, which is be strong, and we will strengthen one another. And so I'm just reflecting on the level of strength. We all have individually the level of sort of strength and those different types of expertise that Jim was mentioning, and that we can really draw on each other in service of the Jewish community, and both do what we need to remain strong for ourselves and our families, and be there to support others and continue to draw strength in one another.
Kate, thank you for closing us out with Jewish wisdom and Torah. That's beautiful. Jim, Elissa, Kate, thank you. Repair the World staff team, you are rocking it. Thank you. And thanks to everyone who has joined us. Keep your eyes open. We have a lot more opportunities coming up for a combination of self-care and reflecting. So there'll be more from Repair the World in your inbox on Monday. Wishing everyone restful, peaceful Shabbat and weekend. And thank you. Thank you for taking the time to be here.